Hello, everyone. Let's get started. Today, we're going to be talking about cover crop termination. I'm Stetson Maldonado, and I'm here with Tom Johnson. And I will be going over the roadmap. The layout of the webinar for today is we're going to go over termination methods. I'll be discussing the mower, the roller, and grazing, and how those different options compare to each other. And then Tom will be going over the different details of why terminate and the different options that are available in decomposition. So the first one, this is the most common one in orchards in California. This is the mower, typically a flail mower. This is what we have here in the picture. It's a flail mower. Some people use rotary,
Rotary.
that one, rotary mowers, but they create larger biomass pieces. So typically people prefer the flail mower because it makes smaller pieces. So you can mow your cover crop at nearly any time. The closer you are to flowering, or if you're after flowering, there's a greater chance that that plant is going to terminate and not try to come back up. If you mow too early in the season, there is a chance for it to try to regrow, like with the grasses. Wouldn't you agree, Tom? Usually the grasses will try to come back up if it's too early.
Yeah. There's certain species of small grains will try to come back, especially if they haven't initiated seed head production yet. So mowing them a little too early and soil moisture will let them try to resprout again, and you'll end up hitting them again with a mower.
Yeah. Um, and then it's really important to chop that biomass into little pieces. The smaller the pieces, the faster it decomposes. And if it doesn't decompose and you're having issues with things like with almond harvest, those smaller pieces have a really high likelihood of being blown out by the fan from the harvester, and it won't end up in your harvested crop. And these mowers, they're widely available almost anywhere in the United States and in California. They're easy to get a hold of. Oh, I put here, yeah, too early, plants can regrow. You do want to go slow when mowing with these things. The faster you go, the harder it is on your tractor and on your mower in general, especially those belts. So if you go slow, you're going to chop those pieces into smaller pieces, and you're going to put less wear and tear on your machinery. And you want to maintain those blades. So you want to go back in there and you want to check your blades, make sure you fix any cracked ones, any chipped ones. You want to have sharp blades because they'll really tear up that cover crop. One thing that I have noted with these is if you're planting the cover crop and you want to make one pass, plant it like a foot or so shorter on each side so it fits under that mower and you're not having to go back for a single little strip on the side. That's just a tip I noticed. You can mow, um, you can do a couple passes if you want to. I like doing a single one because I'm lazy.
Yeah, a lot of people will plant to the width of their mower,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
mowers come in various widths. Um, there are a few, tricks. Basically, leaving a little strip out there might help with your insects, but on the other hand, it's yeah, you gotta go back and get it.
Hmm.
Um, Flail mowers also basically can be adjusted somewhat so that you can mow fairly high the first time, process as much biomass as possible, come back the second time, mow closer to the ground, and fully terminate that cover crop.
Oh, yes, yes, yeah. You can mow
So
it in sections.
keeping that in mind in how you're gonna process that amount of plant material you have out there.
Hmm. Yeah, and another thing I think you've told me about this, Tom, is if your cover crop is growing too quickly, or if some plants are choking out others, you can knock the tops off. So like mow it a couple feet.
Yeah,
Were
I
you
mean,
the one telling me that?
some mowers are capable of being raised up a foot off the ground, but a lot of them basically 6 inches is going to be as high as it'll get. If you're in that situation, then it's going to be a timing issue. You're just going to choose when to do it.
Mhm.
And some cover crops, if they were short statured plants and all your weeds and everything else is taller statured, mowing fairly high then allows sunlight down to that shorter stuff and lets it grow up.
Mhm.
And
I
that's a
will
that's that's a specific type of cover crop you're after on in that situation.
Yeah, and that's more like of a niche topic. I will make a point that if you are lifting up these mowers to mow them, just a safety thing, be careful about these blades popping off the chains and hitting somebody behind you or near you. Uh, just a little bit of a shrapnel warning.
Yeah, it makes a horrible noise when that happens.
It does. It does. It'll scare you. All right, the next one is the roller. I'm a big fan of the roller. They can be a little bit more difficult to use. So there's roller crimpers, and then there's rollers by themselves. Tom, would someone use a ring roller for termination?
We've advised
Or
it occasionally that if that's what you have, that's what you would use. Um, One thing that would just came to my mind basically is if you were using a ring roller because the rings are sections, you want to make sure you don't
Mhm.
have a whole lot of open space because that
Yeah,
what would happen then is then you're going to be pulling stuff up when they get pinched in between rings or jamming it up and pretty soon it's not rolling over. But yeah, ring rollers would work. The crimper roller basically is the best bet, but a flat roller
hmm
will also work.
yeah. I'm a big fan of the roller crimpers. I've seen someone who took a roller and they actually welded some angled rebar to it to make it a roller crimper. And the difference is that a single roller with none of those crimpers on it, it'll knock that plant over and squish it. A roller crimper, it'll have those bars on it, so it'll squish it, but also cause breaks in that stem as it goes over it. Um, What's a benefit of this one is you're not chopping it up into pieces like you would with a mower. You're actually just creating a barrier, a weed barrier, if you have enough of the biomass present. So this one here, it's I want to say a roller crimper. The guy ran over the pollinator brassica mix, so you're just folding it over, you're breaking those stems, and you're making a mat. So this guy told me that if he has a good cover crop stand, and he rolls it, he can go, what was it? 2 to 3 months without any mowing or spraying for weeds. But if he does have a thinner cover crop, then he'd sometimes have to go in a couple weeks later and mow the weeds or spray the weeds. It's much more fuel efficient than the mower because you're not powering that roller, you're just dragging it behind you. And likewise, there's a lot less wear on your machinery because you're just pushing things over. You're not tearing them, you're not breaking them. So it's a lot cheaper, but there is a bit of a catch because timing is so important. If you roll everything that's too early, then there's a high chance that that'll pop back up and it'll regrow. If you roll it too late, then those plants could be horizontal, but they could still stay alive long enough to set seed. And rolling does not work on all species. It works on things that have a stem that could be snapped or could be crushed. If it's something like clovers in particular, they'll just lay down and then they'll come back up because they're not getting snapped or crushed. Um, if
Yeah, so
I've had,
the two biggest things is she's choosing the species and not doing it too early.
mhm,
You the my rule of thumb basically was when those things start to flower, whatever it is that's the majority of the stand starts to flower, it's probably about time that you could hit it with a roller crimper and effectively stop it.
yes, I've
Prior to that, it's still pretty limber, it's still pretty flexible, and if the ground is not particularly stiff underneath of it, whether it's dry or just hard, you might press that stem into the ground, but you wouldn't crimp it, you wouldn't break it, and you won't break the sap flow. So then that
mhm.
plant's like, oh, I'm still green and I'm still rooted. I'm going to stick back up again.
Yeah. So yeah, sometimes they'll make an L where they're horizontal and then they pop that head back up. Another tip that a farmer had told me is she'll go out and she sees how easy the stems are to snap by hand, and if they're pretty easy, then she'll roll around then as well. Um, so those are the rollers. This next one is grazing. As you can see, I did not have any photos of grazing animals, so I got a dog. I've been wanting to use this photo, and it's a furry animal. So imagine it's whatever grazing animal you want, but it's very cute. So the benefits are it can be low cost if you're not having to fuss with a lot of fencing or other issues, it could be really cheap because you're not paying for gas or for fuel. You just run in livestock out there that'll eat that cover crop down. It can increase your soil health benefits. So there's people who have noticed an increase in soil organic matter accumulation compared to not using grazing. And there's increased nutrient cycling. So you're not waiting for this biomass to decompose because it's already been decomposed by the sheep when they digested it. So you'll have some manure out there, which could be really useful. It releases those nutrients that the cover crop had quicker than waiting for it to decay in your orchard. You do want to keep in mind that if there can be compaction if you have wet conditions, especially depending on the animal. I think people struggle most with sheep causing compaction if they leave them out in the rain, just because those little hooves focus their weight a bit more than wider hooves on larger animals. There is the potential for food safety concerns. So there are some processors who won't take your ground harvested crops because they're worried about contamination. So that would be things like your almonds and walnuts, things that are shaken onto the ground and swept up from there. When it comes to food safety regulations, it's important to remove grazing animals 90 days before harvest for off-ground harvested crops. And for ground harvested crops, you have to remove them 120 days before harvest. So that's counting back from your harvest day back to when you have to remove those critters. This also applies for a manure that is applied. So manure applications as well. Those cannot be before those safety dates. For people who don't know the difference or what we're meaning by off-ground and ground harvested are anything that's shaken onto the ground and swept up. So that'd be your almonds, your walnuts. Off-ground harvested things would be like your pistachios but yeah, pistachios are caught by shakers, aren't they? And then put into
Yeah,
boxes.
they're caught in a tarp, so would be prunes.
Yeah.
Chestnuts
So
actually picked up, or not chestnuts, but yeah, chestnuts are picked up off the ground as well.
yeah, so
But
anything that touches the ground and then is picked up, that's ground harvested, and that's going to be your longer waiting window.
yeah, I would definitely reach out to whoever's usually going to purchase your crop and find out what their stance is on it before you jump in whole hog on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just because, I mean, that's do a little due diligence rather than just, call a sheep herder and say, hey, come, I got stuff to eat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do want to be careful because even if you did remove the animals, even more than 120 days before harvesting your crop, your processor could just say that they don't want to deal with that risk. Because there's a lot of research that needs to go into this. So definitely double check with your processor before jumping into this. But there are a lot of opportunities with grazing. One last note is that grazing animals do have the potential to harm perennial crops. Um, I'm not too educated on which animals are more likely to munch your trees or your vines than others, but there is the potential that that animal could want to take a nibble out of your cash crop. Um, Tom, you were pointing
Eh,
out that you can sometimes get multiple grazing runs through a cover crop during the year. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
It's going to depend, excuse me, it's going to depend on the crop you're in. And again, excuse me, again,
You and me both.
where it's going, or who's going to buy it, or whatever type of thing, and then what your relationship is with whoever your herder is. The vast majority of what I've seen are sheep used. Um, they can come in, and the other thing going on is a lot of times that cover crop's not particularly large yet, so they're not going to hang around for a long time in each paddock. But on the other hand, there may be room enough that you come back to where you started in the rotation before you start hitting your deadline of I've got to leave this field type of thing. So that's again, like I said, reach out to the processor, and if you have a shepherd or a shepherd has contacted you about this type of thing, have that plan in place before you even start. That
Mm-hmm.
was, the low cost part was basically, yeah, shepherds are almost always looking for grazing. The biggest trick is, of course, fencing and access and that type of stuff as well. So it's 10 years ago, it was unheard of. Now it's like, yeah, everybody's a little more open to it type of thing. Um, the grazing animals hurting the perennial crops would be basically what the crop is and how much cover crop there is to eat. They're not going to start climbing the trees usually or reaching up until there isn't very much left to eat. Sheep could be hard on grapes, but a lot of times you've removed them from the vineyard prior to them budding out anyways, or they're in there after harvest, which isn't going to hurt anything.
Yeah.
Biggest thing I ever saw was just the gobs of wool that got stuck in the bark around the tree trunks.
Furry trees.
Yeah, furry trees. That was interesting.
Yeah, I was talking to a vineyardist, and I think she runs her sheep and I want to say llamas or alpaca, and she'll run them twice through her vineyards. One thing that she pointed out is if you want your cover crop or your resident vegetation to regrow or recover a bit quicker, you want to make sure you're not grazing that grass lower than 6 inches. And then when she does want to have that terminated and have that gone, she'll keep them there a little bit longer and force them to eat it lower down, closer to 4 inches to prevent regrowth or reduce regrowth. Yeah, and another note, like all termination systems, there is the risk of things regrowing depending on what time you're grazing this cover crop down. Next slide. I'll toss it over to Tom and talk about why terminate in the first place.
Yeah, I mean it's not a normal question, I guess, but on the other hand, I kind of wanted to point out that yeah, there's a reason we do plant a cover crop. There's a lot of reasons, and then there's a reason why we terminate it. We've touched on limiting the residue, especially with almonds or walnuts, crops that we're going to pick up off the ground. Plant residue, dried or semi-dried or half decayed or whatever there is out there, can interfere with making those windrows and picking those windrows up, causing either harvest to slow down or just more stuff getting thrown in the truck versus otherwise. If we can limit how much we get out there and how well it's dried up, as was pointed out, a lot of times it's blown out by the harvester fans. In vineyards, it's not as big a deal, but on the other hand, you are doing operations out there, so you don't really want to be driving through that vineyard all summer long with seed heads hitting you in the face and all that fun stuff. Another reason, basically, that a lot of people look at terminating, whether it's the full termination or a partial termination, is what I would call climate control. There's a couple things going on there in this picture here. I mean, this is frost at bloom in almonds is especially difficult. So going in there and mowing that cover crop, and if you were in a cold spot or you knew you were going to potentially have problems out there, you may be out there mowing that cover crop early so that there's more sunlight hitting the wet soil, and at night that radiates heat back out. There's been a lot of study on it, and basically it kind of boils down to that cover crop's not lowering that temperature in the orchard at 3 or 4 feet off the ground. But on the other hand, it might be. Climate control also would be humidity in the field. And the other one going on is that as that cover crop starts to grow faster in March and April and make seed and basically try to achieve maximum biomass, it's pulling up soil moisture. If you're in a water limited situation, you may want to terminate that thing so it doesn't compete with your crop. And the last one is seed production. I would have a lot of people ask me about, can I get this one to reseed? And it's like, well, you don't really want to do that for a couple reasons. Seed production basically puts food for the ants and everything else out on the ground out there. If you didn't like what you had as a cover crop, it's going to show up again next year if you let it make seed, which makes it harder to control. All these things are easy enough to control herbicides, but why add to the risk a little bit? There's a niche that we talked about a little bit, an annual clover system where you try to get it to reseed, but that could be a whole slideshow in and of itself type of thing on that type of thing. How to go about that. And that's that way. So like I said, and that's the cover crop, why we're terminating that. Now for the cash crop, why we're terminating our cover crop is we do need to prepare for harvest. If we can grind that stuff up into little pieces and it dries out, if not decays, then yeah, it's not going to interfere with harvest. We're not competing for those that soil moisture resources, air temperature resources, that type of stuff with your cash crop. A lot of times cover crop is looked at as we're trying to put some fixed atmospheric nitrogen back in the soil to help boost our cash crop, and basically address some soil fertility or other soil conditions going on out there. So to maximize nitrogen addition, basically you're kind of looking at, okay, I need to get it to the legumes in that cover crop to a certain size, and then basically turning it in, because that then, as that plant material breaks down, is adding that nitrogen to the soil. Otherwise, it's fixed in the plant residue and the cover crop plant residue, and you're not getting all of it out of it, type of thing. But the biggest thing it's having is the soil fertility thing. It's also, the cover crop's also helping break loose a few other things out there. It's helping with water infiltration and feeding your soil biology, which is actually the better thing out of the whole thing. The soil biology is what's making the trees be able to take up what you put on, water or fertilizer. So that's kind of why you do want to terminate. You don't want to just let it grow out there all year round. Not that most of it would. It's just going to, eventually it would turn brown. In most situations, a drip irrigated orchard, it's going to dry up. But on the other hand, you don't need to let it do that.
Yeah.
And dry residue is going to take a lot longer. Dry residue chopped up is going to take a lot longer to break down than if you did it when it's green.
Yeah. And we'll be touching back in on that when we get to the carbon and nitrogen ratios in biomass. Before I advance to the next slide, I just wanted to mention that Project APISIM is currently funding a research trial on cover crops and how it affects frosts in almond orchards. We've been doing it for a couple years. It's just frustrating that we haven't had frost in the almond orchards that we are testing. But it does look like cover crops can decrease the atmospheric temperatures by a couple degrees, just a couple feet above that cover crop. I want to say 2 to 3 feet. They weren't really seeing a reduction in temperature up in the branches of the trees themselves, where the nuts are going to be set. But we are still researching that.
So all about the cash crop. In other words, we're terminating this to meet our cash crop needs. And a cover crop is a non-economic crop planted to benefit your cash crop. It's also, to benefit the soil and what have you, type of thing. So timing a lot of times is going to have, something to do with a lot of those things we were talking about. But in general, in almonds, we're talking about terminating that cover crop, whether if it was young and we didn't mind, we'll roll it. But if we're going to mow it or graze it, we're going to be doing that in March and April, about the time a lot of that stuff's really starting to hit grand growth phase and grow fast. It's also, we need to reduce that stuff down so that there's not a lot of residue at harvest time, because almonds are fairly small and can be kind of hard to pick up. So yeah, I mean, it's you could let it go longer, but you're going to be in trouble if you do that. Walnuts, I've seen them go into May, basically allowing that to be out there before they mowed it or tried to break it down into stuff. But usually that's that March, May, mostly in April. You've got other operations you want to do, and it's not a lot of fun to drive through a jungle out there. So you may as well just mow it and take what you can get out of it. Off-ground harvested trees, which would be like pistachios or prunes, that come to mind anyways. You could potentially handle it much differently. You could let it go a while longer if you wanted to, because you're not having to worry about getting your crop up off the ground. You're going to catch it. Vineyards, a lot of times they will, like I said, it depends what you want to get out of it, the whole thing. Basically, if you're looking for biomass and that type of stuff, biomass and fertility added to the soil, you're going to be doing it in March, about bud break, maybe a little bit later, and you're going to be turning it in. If you're not that worried about it, you may be letting it go into April and then mowing it and just mowing or rolling it and just kind of let it go there. In row crops, open ground, you're going to want to terminate that, including incorporation, 2 weeks prior to what you want to plant your cash crop. That 2 weeks is basically to allow that plant material that biomass that you just put back in the soil, into that soil environment, to start breaking down and stabilize. There's a whole, when we would put biomass into soil, they find that there's a lot of fluctuation in activity. You wake up the biology that's going to digest that material, and it's busy munching away at this now big dessert salad bar that you just gave it. And if you were to stick transplants into that environment, that soil environment, you may be just asking for that soil biology to pivot slightly and eat your transplants. It also would allow you basically to your soil moisture dynamic to stabilize a little bit. If you were planting too moisture, 2 weeks prior to doing that, it's not going to be so dry that you're not going to get anything out of it. But it's, still moist enough that basically you could get seed to moisture to plant to. But it's mostly the biological activity that happens when you dump a whole bunch of food on the soil's plate and it starts to work on it. You don't want to kill your little plants.
It also gives the biomass some time to wilt, so it's not jamming up your planter and get out of the way.
Yeah, you're not balling up stems on your closure wheels and everything else type of thing. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this way you're more positive that cover crop is dead and it doesn't start popping back up when your row crop is starting to grow.
It's not going to haunt you for the next 6 weeks. Yeah, exactly. So yeah.
Yeah, I saw a what was it? Soybean farmer. He planted too early, and he had a wheat cover crop that started growing at the same time as his soybeans. That was a mess.
Yeah, I've seen where cornfields had to be started over again because they planted into the weeds that had come up with the last rain, which was acting like a cover crop. So how we're going to make this stuff go away here. Our moderator of decay here, basically, moisture drives the world, including us. So that's another reason basically to consider terminating fairly early, is at least there's still some moisture in the soil. There's still some moisture potentially going to fall out of the sky type of thing. The presence of water will regulate how fast that stuff will break down. If it's super dry and it's hot, it's going to break down a lot slower than if it's moist and a little bit cloudy and so on and so forth. If you were just chopping that mulch up and laying it on the surface, picture in your mind the top is drying out, but the bottom's now pressed up against that soil, which is moist. And as it dries out, it's sucking moisture out of the soil and help bringing it up into that. It's also bringing the biology up and helping just break down that mat that's laying there. So if you mowed it and it was dry underneath of, which it rarely is in the spring, it's going to take a while longer for it to break down. And if you mowed it in, you were in a vineyard and you went and mowed it in May, and it was already all dried up, and the ground in the middle's all dried up, you're going to have straw out there in August.
You could try to take advantage of that for preserving your soil moisture by trying to mow it a little bit drier in things like vineyards, but that's more of a experiment with it by yourself on your farm to see what you prefer. Something else we like to point out about moisture is termination could depend a lot on your irrigation system. So if you have a solid set irrigation system that's covering the entire orchard floor, you can mow a lot later. It's much more forgiving than if you were in Southern California on a drip system and not able to wet that biomass. So if you can't get it wet, then you want to consider mowing it earlier than if you can.
Yeah, in the situation where you need it to decay and where you need it to go away, and moisture may be the limiting factor, terminating a little bit earlier may or may not is probably the better way than wait and see. The only thing you do want to be aware of is try not to do it so wet that you're actually adding to your compaction problem by driving your tractor and mower across it.
Yeah, don't go plant your tractor out in the field.
Yeah, don't. Yeah, those ruts are really hard to fill in, and it's embarrassing because you usually do it next to the road and everybody laughs at you. Uh, but yeah, and most people are not going to do that, and you're not going to be out there mowing when there's standing water out there anyways. You're defeating the purpose at the time because your cover crops can help suck up some of that water and help some of that water soak in. So yeah, we'll just have to wait a week. But if moisture content was going to be the limiting factor on how fast that would decay out there, and you have the ability to mow a little bit earlier, you might just do that.
Yeah.
What's your next one?
Particle size.
Yeah, well, that's we've I won't say harped on, but we've also kind of stressed a little bit that a flail mower generally does a little bit better job than a rotary mower. A rotary mower doesn't chop a standing cover crop up as well, and it usually doesn't distribute it very well. Whereas a flail mower usually gets 2 or 3 strokes at it before it spits it out the back. At one time, they actually even put baffle plates in there to try and keep the plant material in the chopping chamber longer on flail mowers. So the smaller those pieces are, the more surface area there is, the faster it breaks down, the faster it dries up. Took me a long time to wrap my head around that one, but it's like, yeah, okay, that kind of makes sense. And then if it is just laying out there all summer long, the smaller pieces are lighter. They blow out that fan a little easier. But a little bit of residue isn't going to hurt a lot of times in a windrowing situation especially for almonds, is actually it kind of settles to the bottom of the windrow and the almonds are sitting on top of it and it's kind of acting like a little air cushion for them a little bit. So it's a fine balance, and no 2 years are ever the same, but basically the smaller you can chop it up, the better off you're going to be, which kind of goes, do we want to take 2 strokes at it, go in fairly high, beat it up, and then come back later and beat it and let that dry down for a week or two, and then come back and mow even closer to the ground, kill the plants for sure, and all that stuff that we mowed off 2 weeks ago is kind of wilted up and browned up a little bit. It chops up even finer. Um, the
Or you
small
can drive.
pieces aren't as good a weed barrier, but on the other hand, they do break down and go way faster. So that's going to be a choice of what you do and whether your trees are bearing or not. If they're bearing, you probably do want to make as small a particle as possible and let it get dried up and small and decayed or digested. If you're in a younger orchard that you're not going to be harvesting yet, yeah, the roller might be the way to go. Is mash that down and just let it lay there all summer.
Yeah, and driving speed will affect the particle size. Comparing the two mowers again, the good rule of thumb is that the flail mower will shred everything that it cuts, and the rotary mower will cut that cover crop. So it'll leave a nicer, cleaner cut on the stem, which makes it very favorable for things like golf courses, if you're mowing your own lawn. That's a rotary mower because you're wanting that nice clean cut. The flail mower is more of a shredder than anything.
Yeah, it's just speed has and yeah, don't get it to where it's rocking. You better, if it's rocking, you need to slow down, because then you're adding stress to your flail mower and so on, and you're also not getting as good a cut as you could. So yeah, you're not going to be going very fast that first go through with a flail mower.
Mm.
And then last but not least is basically what's making up that biomass we're trying to get rid of. Carbon to nitrogen ratio, or nitrogen to carbon, however you want to put it, basically of green material. The more nitrogen in the biomass, the faster it's going to break down because it's made out of protein, and that's what everybody likes to eat. So if it's a highly legume in the biomass, they generally break down a little faster. But the thing is even the small grains in the brassicas are fairly, when they're green before they start to harden up too awful much, they're fairly high in nitrogen. They're fairly high in protein. So they do break down. That's another reason to mow them while they're still green before they become physiologically mature or start making seed basically on that type of stuff. And because they're also getting stiffer, there's more lignin, there's more carbon structure in those stems, which is how they stay up in the wind and stand upright and hold that heavy seed head up. Is now the stems are getting stiffer. Well, the more carbon you have in that to how much nitrogen or protein there is in that plant material is going to slow down or speed up how fast that'll break down. If you were incorporating, yeah, you usually wanted to do it while it was green and juicy rather than letting it get real mature, because that would release what nitrogen there was in there faster. And counting on that nitrogen in your soil fertility program is kind of a rolling the dice a little bit. Yes, it's going to be a net addition, but how much you're going to get out of it and when that's going to show up is kind of up to things that you don't have a lot of control over. So keep that in mind. So, anyways, and then incorporation. I mentioned that a few times. In most bearing orchards, incorporations, I won't say off the table, but it's not necessarily something that they're going to do in the spring. Mostly because you're also having a spring root flush of your cash crop. And if you went out there and dished this material under, you're going to damage some of those feeder roots and potentially set that up for what you got back out of it. But incorporation account increases the amount of nitrogen and biomass that we're going to get into the soil profile that much faster. If you were in open ground or if you're in a younger orchard or something like that, then incorporation is, I usually would recommend it, mostly just to put that back in the back into the soil profile, so it's adding that while it's still easy to break down, it's still easy to deal with. If it got hard and dry, then yeah, it just takes longer to go away. If you've ever seen a oat field that was dished out after they had baled and let it sit all summer, you kind of notice the stubble takes a long time for it to go away if they don't put some water on it. And then one of these little fun tricks here for brassicas. Uh, brassicas have a chemistry in the plant material that breaks down into glucoisocyanates, which is basically kind of a low grade soil fumigant. It's not a true fumigant. It doesn't fume, but it kind of like I won't say sterilized, but it basically kind of does a bunch of cell disruption and various other fun things to organisms as that plant material breaks down. Well, that level of that stuff is basically rising and up through flowering and then stays kind of about the same through the first seed starting to set, and then it starts to decline a little bit. And it has to do with biomass, how much biomass there is in the plant. It's all that's the whole thing. To make that work, basically you do need to break that material up into fine pieces so it will break down fast and then get it incorporated quickly. Because the material turns into kind of an atmospheric gas and will literally gas off. If you ever drove by a broccoli field and you could smell the after they dished it up, you smell the sulfur. That's the chemical reaction that's going on out there. And yeah, it's another operation. That's why most bearing orchards seem to be basically, we're going to mow it until we beat it to death and it goes away and it gets small enough I don't have to worry about it anymore. And I'll let the roots do what they did versus trying to incorporate it. Yeah, okay. So kind of recapping the points we made here. Choosing when and how to terminate has a lot to do with what your cash crop is, how you're going to have to harvest it, type of thing, and what your level of tolerance to biomass or plant material out there is going to be. As to you may also want to start earlier than you had to. You've got 2 mowers and 5,000 acres to cover. You're going to have to start when you have to start. So some of it will get mowed just right, and some of it might get mowed a little early, and some of it might get a little late. So that's between the cash crop and the timing type of thing. Particle size to keep in mind is the smaller it is, the faster it'll go away. Soil moisture can be preserved by removing the cover crop or leaving the residue laying on the surface. You could also reduce soil moisture if that was something that you had to do by letting your cover crop grow a little bit longer, because it is pulling up water basically. The carbon to nitrogen ratio is going to be affected by what was in the cover crop, what the different materials were, and how successful each of those different materials was. I've seen where the fertility of the soil, the nitrogen fertility of the soil, and you had a small grain mixed with legumes. The legumes are lazy; they don't grow as well as the grass does. The next row over, where the soil nitrogen wasn't as high, the legumes might be a little bit thicker. But that's the nitrogen basically in legumes is really going to start to stack into the plant material about the time they start to flower. So letting those legumes get to flower might be about the time it's like, okay, it's going to get more, but do I want to deal with material that's hard to get rid of? Whether it's getting harder to break down or just bigger and harder to mow and deal with. So you could probably do some lab testing on that, or you can go and kind of guess some by golly type of thing on that. But the more carbon there is in there, in other words, the older the plants are, the slower it's going to break down. Okay.
We are wrapping up the webinar, but before we go, I wanted to say thank you to our donors. And as a reminder for everybody, or if you didn't know, Seeds for Bees is entirely funded by donations. So we don't get any government or state money. This is important for people who want to be part of the program because you're able to stack it with any state or federal grant, and it will not prevent you from being able to get a grant or participate in a federal program. We are so thankful for the people that are able that donate and keep us going. We are funded by corporations, beekeepers, and farmers. And should you find yourself in the position to donate, you can scan the QR code, or I'll include a link in the description to our donation page. Anything you can give, we would be incredibly thankful for. And we also have a Seeds for Bees impact report. We put that out every year. We talk about how many acres we've planted. This is the 2024 season as far as that report goes, but depending on when you're watching this, we might have a different report or a more up-to-date report posted. But I wanted to thank everybody for attending and for listening to the webinar, and I wanted to thank Tom for all of his wisdom in cover crops and farming, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you much for attending.